Star Trek: The Children of Hamlin is the I probably already said all that. Oh wow. So one of the issues I already had with this book to start with is the back is actually covered by a giant sticker, and it wasn't a sticker that was put on by like Goodwill or anything like I have many of my stickers with, but rather that this looks like one of the original stickers that was on. So I kind of started recording this before I started, and I didn't just record one book in this little video, so I can't really just stop and do this later. Plus, with the week I'm having as I record this, I really don't have a lot of time to just stop and do things again, so I want to be able to do this now so I can just get into the book, and then, so you can experience the genuine first reaction I have rather than just, oh, well, here's me pretending to react to it the first time. Now, based on the previous two I've read, I'm not sure what to expect from this book. As you know, I really loved Ghost Ship, but when it came to the Peacekeepers, I didn't find it as interesting. I really went into it why in my video of it, so I won't repeat myself here. But Star Trek: The Next Generation, The Children of Hamlin, is the third in the Star Trek Pocket Editions. So I'm really hoping that this one lives up more to the first one rather than the second. The author is Carmen Carter. I don't think she was the author on either of the other two. Let's go ahead and read the back of the book. So, because, with the cover of these pocket editions, it really doesn't tell me much. I pointed out in Peacekeepers and even Ghost Ship that it just kind of throws images on the page, and it's clearly aiming for, like, a recognition thing. You got Patrick Stewart there. So here's the back. The Hamlin Massacre. Every Starfleet officer knows this tale. The tiny Federation outpost of Hamlin was destroyed. The entire adult population ruthlessly slaughtered before the first defense shields could be raised. Even worse, the colony's children disappeared without a trace, abducted by the aliens who attacked with ferocity and speed that outmatched their Starfleet pursuers. Now, 50 years later, the Choraii starships have appeared again. But this time the Federation is ready. This time the Choraii must pay for what they need. Okay, that's not what I was expecting from that. I was expecting to pay for what they've done. The precious metals can only be bought with the Hamlin children still living with their captors. This time the Choraii must face Captain Jean-Luc Picard and the crew of the Starship Enterprise. So this one outright already sounds a little bit more interesting in terms of what the actual narrative's about. Watching Jean-Luc Picard deal with a threat that plagued the Federation years ago and has to come back to it now and see how he handles it, it's definitely going to be an interesting one. I'm definitely expecting a couple more twists here and there, that it's not just going to be an easy, oh, the Choraii were just evil people. And I'm saying Choraii right now. I've corrected my pronunciation if it's wrong in the main video, but that's just what I'm getting. It's like probably Choraii, but I think Choraii is fake. The safe option here. But anyways, so that actually does sound interesting. I'm actually kind of looking forward to see where this one takes me, and I will admit I will be pretty disappointed if it ends up being like the last book, which feels like I said, a recycled script that wasn't properly adapted to the book. That's always my fear when I get to these like expanded lore for series that have been going on for a while. It feels less like I'm reading books written to expand the universe and more just, this wasn't an idea for an episode we had, but we're never able to make it onto screen. Heck, even a couple times I have read books. It is that, but then like, oh, we finally got the funding, so that's not like the Mr. Monk Goes to the Firehouse I mentioned. That was a book first and became a actual episode of the TV series. And as I pointed out in that review, they are very different. But to move on. Welcome back to Afrodo Reviews, and on this channel, I hope you decide. Is this book worth reading over a second breakfast? Or does it deserve the fiery pits of Mount Doom? Star Trek: Children of Hamlin is the third entry in the Pocket The New Generation book series, published on November 1st of 1988 and written by author Carmen Carter. The book itself seems to take place after the first season episode Arsenal of Freedom, due to a reference of Beverly Crusher suffering from an injury. Although apart from that, I don't think there's much else in terms of specific background I can actually offer on this book in specific. It was really, really kind of fills out a gray space in terms of stuff I can talk about here and stuff I'll mention a little bit later, but isn't necessarily relevant to the creation of this book. Anyways, here are the ratings. Let's move on to the cover. I've reviewed Ghost Ship and the Peacekeepers at this point, and one thing I have noticed with the covers of each book is they just kind of slap on any random character from the New Generation series. Now, I'll give this one a little bit credit that Picard and Beverly Crusher do have big roles in the story. So I'm not disparaging their inclusion on the front, but who is that? I don't know who this person is. I can't, like... I binge watched a couple seasons of the New Generation before I did this review, just so I had a little more familiarity with the source material to actually talk about this. And I cannot for the life of me, tell you who this is. I won't say I'm perfectly familiar with it, but I mean, it obviously can't be Tasha Yar because she's blonde, and though she was originally designed to be a dark-haired character...
Hey, Vasquez. Have you ever been mistaken for a man?
No. Have you?
She's blonde in the series, and this came out in 1988. So the New Generation had been on about a year at this point. And of the various characters throughout the book, there's not one other significant one that I think appearance actually fits. Now, my only guess, really, is this is a character that's a guest star in this book, so to speak, called Ruth. She does have black hair, but in the book she's described as in her early 20s. And maybe it's just the way they kind of turned it into a painting of sorts or something, but this sort of looks like a middle-aged woman to me. I just... Who is this woman? If anyone knows, feel free to tell me, please. Now, beyond that, the rest of the cover is actually pretty decent for one of these. There's a space background, the Enterprise is in a far-off distance, got a series of bubbles directly behind the Mystery Woman, which is a direct reference to the Choraii and their starships, which are antagonists throughout the story. So overall, apart from the Mystery Woman on the cover, it's not a terrible cover. It's actually a pretty decent one. At least compared to something like Peacekeepers, which I felt did not reflect the book at all. Now, typically this is where I do the synopsis. So, I think what I read on the back of the book is pretty decent for where terms of what you need to know going into the story is. Although I will say there is a couple things I want to add on. And namely, that's just throughout the book, there's a subplot where the Enterprise is escorting a group known as the Farmers, or basically Space Amish, to a new planet. It's called New Oregon, and the subplot is there, mostly for a Wesley Crusher subplot. I'll get into that a little bit later, but now it's time for the actual question. Does this book hold up? Well, it's definitely better than Peacekeepers, but I still maintain that Ghost Ship is my favorite of the Pocket New Generation novels so far. That's not to discredit this book. It had me pretty hooked for most of it, and I think the characters were decently characterized with who they were in Season 1. Now, like I said, this is obviously a late Season 1 book, so there's still a problem where, while the author clearly has a better idea of who the characters are now, they're still clearly kind of taking form. They're not quite who they would become known as. There's a lot of nitpicks I could make about various things the author got wrong, but I feel they're a bit more on this kind of side of nitpick.
Episode 2F09, when Ichi plays Scratchy's skeleton like a xylophone, he strikes the same rib twice in succession, yet he produces two clearly different tones.
Rather than be genuine detracting elements of the book, they're just really nitpicky. Well, that technically isn't right, kind of nitpicks, like the Constitution-class starship having the wrong amount of warp nanocells, Data using a contraction a couple points in the book, despite pointedly not being a character who uses contractions. The Choraii are a race who live underwater and communicate via music, but the main method of communication that Starfleet has with them throughout most of the book is with a flute, which is a wind instrument. So, how does that work? Now, the story is also better written than Peacekeepers. As I've mentioned a lot with these accompanying novels into other media, especially ones with TV shows. Oh my god. I'll be right back. Shush. I'm adjusting my light, you freak. The story is better written than Peacekeepers. As I've mentioned a lot with novels that accompany other media, especially ones with TV shows, a lot of these novels read like they were tossed scripts. Peacekeepers was especially bad about that. But I think this story comes off like a lot more genuine effort was made into turning it into a book, a lot like the Doctor Who book. There are a couple instances here and there where they seem to forget the story is not going to be audible to an audience. As a couple points, they describe the Choraii, who are forced to interact with the Enterprise and Federation Standard, or English, and the voice is described as sounding weird, but not how it sounds weird. Is it like someone constantly running out of breath? Does it sound like they're gurgling water? Are they trying, or maybe it sounds like they're trying to speak while drowning? There are a lot of ways you can take an aquatic species speaking English as them talking weird, and they all present very different mental images. So this is one of those cases where less words was not your friend. I once more like how Wesley Crusher was used in this novel. Admittedly, I haven't seen the worst of Wesley Crusher in the new generation yet. How he's been used in the book so far has been pretty interesting. His subplot in this one is just him making a friend and trying to help his friend go against the customs of that friend's planet. It's entirely about Wesley dealing with emotional problems, something he can't just think his way out of, and he doesn't always seem to know what he's doing, just kind of making it up as he goes along, because it's entirely emotional. So far, if you had asked me based solely on my experience with the novels, Crusher doesn't come off like a Mary Sue or an author's pet. Now, again, I don't know if that changes the deeper into the novels I get, as I know the deeper into the show you get, he also becomes more and more intolerable, or at least so I've heard. But I haven't reached that point. Like I said, I binge-watched mostly the first season. I think I said a couple seasons, but I binge-watched mostly the first season in preparation for this review. I do like that this book does step away from Data and Geordi LaForge as the front-runner roles. It's not that I dislike them, I actually really like Geordi LaForge. But after 2 books where they're at least part of the main cast of that episode, it is kind of nice to see them leave the spotlight for other characters. In this one, Picard and Crusher are the ones who receive the majority of the focus. The book actually handles most of the bridge crew in this one pretty well, ironically with the exception of LaForge, as if you were to ask me, he's the one who gets the least amount of relevancy in this novel. But you have Lieutenant Worf overcoming the Choraai's main method of attack. Yar has an emotional dealing with the alien. Riker uses his signature Riker charm on characters. Data is Data. At this point, I think I'm trying too hard to convince you that I didn't hate this book. I think I should really just get into the main issue. Or main issues. So the first thing I can offer without diving into the spoiler section just yet is that the crew of the Enterprise sort of feel like secondary characters to the conflict, which does feel weird considering my previous compliment, but what I mean by that is when it comes down to the negotiations and the dealing with the Choraii are done by Ruth and Delore, book-unique characters. Since the majority of the negotiations are done with music, we don't actually see what's being said through it, and Picard has no say in how the negotiations proceed because that's entirely Delore's job. The only time Picard is in full control is during a moment somewhere near the middle, and it doesn't really last long enough to matter. I think this would have been one of those cases where it would have been more interesting if we had seen Picard take the spot of negotiation rather than this new mystery character in Delore. I will also say, in light of that the story also has a problem with constantly trying to pull the rug out from under you. It feels compared to keep trying to jump out from beneath the cupboard and yell, "Gotcha!" When in reality, you can hear it sitting there giggling to itself for 10 minutes before it actually tries to jump out. It really abuses the whole concept where one party keeps withholding information throughout the book, and only releases that information after it becomes relevant rather than being upfront and allowing them to prepare. Considering the circumstances they found Delore in, is one of the main parties that keep secrets, it comes off as egregious and annoying more than anything. Never mind the fact that I actually kind of hate the need-to-know trope, because at certain points in stories like this, it's used at a beyond reasonable precaution. And any normal person, or any reasonable person, I guess I should say, could see that withholding the information the way they are is not helping the mission, but rather hindering it. Delore is actually surprisingly more tolerable using this trope, as he doesn't keep holding back the information once it becomes pertinent. But he does refuse to share it unless it becomes relevant, even though he knows it's likely that it's going to be needed. Thus, he doesn't give Picard or the crew any time to actually prepare for these things. Another thing that I basically just told you earlier, but the farmer subplot of this book is completely pointless. Like, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. The space Amish in this book, there's no point to them existing here. Like, the farmers take up little under half of the book with their various gripes and interactions with the crew, but for the most part, they are not relevant. At one point near the end, their inclusion factors into choices being made in the final climax, I guess. But other than that, you could just remove them from the story and the narrative doesn't change. They don't mesh at all with the Choraii narrative. It's not trying to say something that symbolically ties to them, or the struggles of the farmers with the Starfleet in a similar nature to, say, the Choraii and humans. There's no point to them. Heck, even the ending of Wesley and his friend's character arc feels forced, as if the author suddenly realized, oh, yeah, I guess I can't introduce a character that Wesley would keep in contact with, because he doesn't talk to that character in the show, so I guess I'll just have to write him out in a way that we can never hear from Dennis again.
Guess this is it then.
Yeah. Well, you take care of that truck of yours.
Which is a shame, because I do think there is something that could have been done there, but like in terms of the overall narrative and the friendship. But in order to talk about that, I need to discuss my biggest issues with the book. And this comes up with a very good spoiler tag. And in order to really explain the biggest gripe I had with this book, how some of the conclusions, the twists and turns, and how they all affect the overall story and my enjoyment of it, I obviously need to spoil it. If you want to go into this book blind, knowing nothing more than what I've already stated, here's your chance to skip ahead to the conclusion. For those of you who are ready to hear the spoilers, let us continue onward. Allons-y! Yeah, I still kind of got Doctor Who on the brain. So, the book feels like it wants me to see the Choraii more sympathetically than how it actually presents them. Now, the whole reason in this book we're interacting with, and thus engaging with the Choraii throughout the book, is that 50 years ago, the Choraii slaughtered every man and woman on the settlement of Hamlin, and then proceeded to kidnap every human child. No one knows why they did this, and until this book, they didn't even have a name for the aliens who did it. We find out later that the Choraii did this because they wanted the minerals that Hamlin had, and that they don't view humans as anything more than wild animals that are in the way, and so they just slaughter them. Now, this is supported by author Carmen Carter's own quote about this book. To quote, "The first story idea, which was of Ruth being taken away from the Choraii at a young age, sorta came as a whole about 10 years ago. When I decided to adapt the idea and place it in the Star Trek universe, then I had to develop the subplot and work out more carefully some of the other characters involved with her. I think the Choraii had the same reaction to human children that we have to kittens and puppies. You may kill a wolf or a fox, but if you find a litter of cubs with their eyes still shut, then oftentimes you'll keep those and hand raise them rather than kill them. they view humans as animals that are basically wild. But if you catch them young and train them the right way, they make great household pets. And this interpretation is pretty clear throughout the book. It's clear that the Choraii don't view humans as a sentient race. They view them as animals. They just like the kids they stole as pets and have nothing but hostility towards the rest of humans. But the problem with this is it's written in a way that it almost wants you, the reader, to give the Choraii a pass because of this. Yes, the Choraii are genocidal monsters who kidnap children because they think they're cute for a lifetime of slavery. But that's just because they think we're dumb animals. You know, even though they know we have a language, a galactic federation, a standard language among the various people in that language that they had to learn, and are actively dealing with them in a mercantile sense and show clear anger at them having stolen the children from earlier. You know, all signs of high-functioning brain things that a wolf wouldn't really have. But, you know, they think kids are cute. So, I mean, it's obviously forgivable. But hear me out. This interpretation could have worked if the Hamlin slaughter was the first and the only time the Choraii did this. A mistaken sort of identity that they realized in air after they really got to understand what the humans were. And the only reason they're holding on to the Hamlin children so much is because, well, they've already been ingrained in the culture. It's been like 50 years since this happened, so the Hamlin children are as much part of their culture nowadays than anything else, right? Only, no. They commit the same heinous action again near the end of the story, completely wiping out the farmer settlement that was on New Oregon to steal the minerals and kidnapping the children on there to keep as pets. And again, the story kind of wants you to see them through forgiving eyes. The book even ends with Ruth, our translator who is a descendant of one of the Children of Hamlin, going back into slavery in order to save a singular kidnapped child from New Oregon. Because she believes that she might be able to convince the Choraii humans are smart. But, like, I don't think that's possible. The Choraii know that. They spoke with us. They've traded with us at this point. So if they don't accept the fact that we're not wild animals that need to be slaughtered anytime they just want some of the minerals we have, and then kidnap our children, they're clearly not going to listen to humans, who they see as nothing more than household pets. The entire end of this book tries to act like it's some bittersweet triumph that one day the Choraii and the humans will come together and understand, but it's just bitter. The Choraii don't care, clearly. They're going to slaughter humans if they're in the way, but then kidnap the kids. And then they're going to get butthurt when we want those kids back. They sacrifice the only translator to the Choraii to save a single child from New Oregon. It's basically stated that the original Children of Hamlin cannot be rescued because they'll just die. They've been with the Choraii too long. And, you know, it's basically shown that the original Children of Hamlin cannot be rescued. Because they'll just die because they've been with the Choraii too long. And they definitely have to save the descendants fast because the older they get as slaves to the Choraii, the less likely they'll want to come home. This isn't just me grasping at straws. Every instance of the Enterprise interacting with a slave of the Choraii is shown to be a case where the slave was clearly perfectly happy and content as a slave. Even the little farmer girl they rescued, whose mother is literally slaughtered by the Choraii with a horrific acid bath, comes aboard smiling and happy, even though the Choraii don't have transporters, which would mean Emily would have been on this settlement when her mother died, and then these aliens would have went down and kidnapped her and her friends and taken them aboard the ship after slaughtering every adult she knows. This would be like if you're playing the first Mass Effect and you got to the I Remember Me quest. And basically the entire quest would just be like, oh, well, Tabitha, you got the wrong idea. Clearly the Batarians just liked you as a pet. Get over it.
Mommy and Daddy. Burning in white light, melting, going to pieces. They can't even say anything to her.
And like I said, it's one of the members of the original Children of Hamlin we see in this book, Jason, is just so terribly heartbroken at being taken away from the Choraii, so much so that he basically just loses the will to live and dies. Now, this is definitely much less forced than Emily, since at least Jason lived with them for 50 years, plenty of time reasonably for Stockholm Syndrome to set in. But the idea that the original Children of Hamlin resented being rescued so much that they really just decide that they'd rather be dead than as pets to the Choraii doesn't sit right with me. Yeah, by the way, we also get told that 4 other Children of Hamlin who were saved before the events of the books just decided to die too. And that's very purposeful wording of my part. Now, I'm going to give this book a little bit of credit in this regard. It does offer a slight alternate explanation on this. You see, in the Choraii atmosphere, there is a chemical that operates as a narcotic to humans. It never explains what this narcotic is or the effects it has, other than it smells like cinnamon. But this at least can offer an explanation that the reason it's harder for captives who've been with the Choraii longer to acclimate to human society is because they've literally been on drugs for 50 years straight and then they're suddenly forced to quit cold turkey. Or at least, I should be able to give the book that credit, but even Beverly Crusher deems that Jason basically just died of a broken heart and not because of a catastrophic system shock after losing access to a drug he's been on his whole life. It's very much to that scene in Star Wars, except somehow worse. Like I said, this just comes off to me like a major fumble, and I think the author expected me to be much more sympathetic to the Choraii, when in reality, I'm entirely with the Enterprise crew when they show horror at the idea of trading minerals for the kids, and refuse to allow the Choraii to keep any of the slaves at all. I am fully on Picard's side when he wants nothing to do with the Choraii, other than to effectively just kind of want to threaten them to give back the kids. And at a certain point, you can even see from Picard's point of view, if we trade minerals for kids they kidnapped, what's stopping the Choraii from just going to wiping out settlements, kidnapping more kids, and then using that to extort us for more minerals? This is kind of one of those, it almost feels like the characters are shooting themselves in the foot by playing along with this bullshit. The Choraii know we're not wild animals. But if they're going to keep using that excuse to slaughter us, then just trying to engage with them like this doesn't mean they're going to suddenly stop. All in all, I guess I'd give this book a 4 out of 10. I didn't hate this book. It's really hard to say that because this book isn't something I really struggled with reading. I had more trouble getting through the Peacekeepers, reading through that all the way through. But, and like for the most part, it's written completely fine in a purely technical sense. It's just one of those things, the more you think about what the book is saying, what the book is telling you, the way the book is portraying things, the more you sort of like, I don't like that. No, I don't like that. Like I said, this book almost wants me to sympathize with the Choraii, and it keeps trying to offer explanations why they keep just slaughtering human settlements. But if you look at all the evidence presented, no, clearly the Choraii know we're not wild animals. But so what they're doing is not forgivable. This isn't a case of cultural differences. This isn't a case where they're just like, oh, well, we didn't know it was living and breathing. We just thought it was there, so we shot it like 20 fucking times. And it's kind of like, I just did not like this. I'm sorry. This is one of those ones that it just really got to me with how the book wanted me to sympathize. And I think that all comes down to when Carmen Carter was talking about how the story originated as basically telling it from Ruth's point of view. And I think that kind of boiled over. I think in the story she initially imagined, Ruth would have come to love her captives, and we would have seen mostly favorably through her eyes. But since we have an outside point of view, we clearly see that this isn't good. And I guess at this point I'm just rambling, kind of repeating myself over again about why I really didn't like this book, but it really needs emphasizing about why I don't like this. I don't know. Maybe it's just something I don't get. But yeah, that being said, I don't really have much else to say about this book. This is definitely one of the ones that's like, there's nothing technically wrong with it, and unlike Peacekeepers, where I would just say just skip it, this one's fine if you really want to read it, it's not good though. I would not recommend reading it. Well, that being said, just remember, With every book comes an adventure, and every adventure's worth having, even the bad ones. See you later, everyone.